Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Patching Experts Roundtable. I know there will still be a few of you straggling in, but we thought we'd get started and get this conversation underway. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Shelly Kamashak, and I'm with Flexera, and I'm with a great group of people on the Flexera side today. We have Bob Kelly and Kieran Montaghi, who are on our product team, as well as Dylan Hudak, who's an engineer that's been working closely with our customers in the patch management space for years and years. So hopefully we'll have a good conversation with you today and address some timely topics. And along that line, we would like you to enter your questions in the QA area of the webcast. You should see two little conversation boxes with a question mark in there, and you can enter your questions there. It's just due to the nature of this type of communication, we can't have everybody speaking and talking over each other. So hopefully we're able to address everything that you pose to us today, and we're actually looking forward to that because that will help the conversation flow and be more interesting to all of our customers who are on the line. And even if you don't have a specific question, feel free to suggest a topic in the Q&A and we can delve into that topic. We do have some prepared content, but we really are counting on all of you who are on the line here to help us keep the conversation going in the way that you would like it to. And we can go up to an hour. We can end early if all of the topics have been covered, but that is our plan today. So thanks again for joining us, and I'll hand it over to Bob Kelly to start the conversation flowing. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelley. Appreciate that. We've, the idea here is to have it be more conversational and driven by your questions. So please do submit questions, but just so that we aren't all sitting around looking at each other waiting for questions to come in. We do have a topic to go through, and it's basically, the overall very high level patching process. Like, how do you know what's out there? How do you prioritize? How do you go about it? And so we start with what is out there. So if you're here in a patching session, then you obviously have a target. So what, and please, it doesn't have to be questions, you can give us feedback, but how do you go about knowing, what is out there, what needs to be patched? Ideally, you have some sort of inventory system. I think the quality of inventory systems can be a little all over the place. If you have like an endpoint management system like SCCM, for example, you have a software inventory there, but we know that that's kind of noisy and messy and maybe not the ideal source. And then, you've got to line that up with what you need to manage or not manage, how many applications are appearing in your environment that you don't want to be patching for security because you have a finite number of managed applications that you care about. I know it's less common for everybody to have admin access where they can just install whatever they want, but we definitely still see that happen quite often, and that makes an up-to-date and clean inventory extra important, just so you know what your target for software vulnerability patching really is. And then even when you have that inventory, what level of detail are you getting from that inventory? Sometimes you'll just see the application and the major version. Sometimes it goes down to a very detailed version. But when it comes to, do you need to apply a patch or not, you really do need to know just what version do you have installed, and just what version that you have installed is associated with a vulnerability or a threat that you need to deal with. And depending on the source of your inventory or the quality of your inventory, the maturity or the process you have around inventory and making sure it's strong, you may not have that kind of detail, and then you end up with more of a directional view of what you need to be looking into versus what you definitely need to get done. Dylan, if I could pull you in to give your thoughts on this. What are you seeing when you talk to people, and your own thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of what is key, right? We're looking at and talking about kind of sources or items that can be leveraged to bring things to a team or a user, whoever, in order to start moving forward. But really, it's process driven. Everything is process driven, and it's not necessarily the quality of the data, the quality of the process as well is really important, and that's where it goes to. Right, I think the removal of local admin, for instance, which we touched on, is a procedural part. It's an internal plan or process that exists to help and set the stage on what will exist. When you add to that an approved software list, you now have a very strong understanding of what exists within your environment. And knowing what's out there before you even start creating and looking at inventory to see what versions of what's out there is going to set the stage to how you will again address items in your environment, right? What's first, what's second, blah, blah, blah. Well, even your approved software list is actually going to help drive that as well. So what's out there could actually be known before you even start. And that, again, is part of a process that's going to help you to better address what's going on in the environment. Once you find out what's out there and it's a million things, what percent of that is feasible to address, right?
And Dylan,
so, yeah.
Could I interrupt you? We have a question that's come in. The requester asks, how do you deal with businesses wanting to hold back updates because of functionality issues?
Great question. That's a great question. So it's the efficiency of process and making money versus efficiency of process and potentially not being breached and then torpedoing that and all the other fun things that could occur, right? And this is an ongoing issue that has existed since patching has started, right? Do I interrupt my business system, my business process, in order to enable this fix, whatever it may be, feature function, which brings more to the table for the user of that to deliver, or if it's a security item to plug a hole that could eventually lead that stack to get taken out. It ends up being a money issue, right? In an ideal world, I would have a high availability virtual version of that same business process sitting warm right alongside the one that's running. No one wants to pay for this, but it's the exact way to go about it. I would then patch up my warm instance that's waiting for the primary to fail over, and I would bring that up, test it, make sure it's square, and then hot swap that with the other one, and then bring that up to that version waiting to be failed over to that, right? If it's a business process that's driving income, there best be reliability built into that process. And if you're not addressing a high availability virtual replacement essentially, or a hot swap to that business process, you're setting yourself up for failure right away, right? Not only looking at the fact of how would I address feature function and or security patches to that entity, preserving our revenue stream. Well, we have the answer. You have to spend money to make money. It's a given forever, right? So I would have a high availability, warm hot swap server that I've patched up, tested, it's ready to go, it works, and I would bring that over, bring the other one offline, bring that up to the same level, so in case my primary fails, it has the proper secondary to fail to.
And we often see the flip side of that problem, right? So the update is available and it's being prioritized for deployment, but maybe it shouldn't be. Right? Is it addressing is it just feature functions? That doesn't mean that you don't deploy new functionality that you've paid for with your maintenance that you're eligible for, but you may well want to prioritize that lower than something that is a actual vulnerability. And another thing that you touched on, Dylan, made me think the whole concept of application rationalization. When it comes to what applications are being managed, the number of applications, the more you can get that down, and you don't have a bunch of applications that perform the same capabilities for your business, the smaller your security footprint, the less applications that you have to update, and the less applications that have a potential to introduce a security risk to your environment. So it's hard for us to even talk about this, what's out there, without starting to step on, just what needs to be patched. So hopefully you're not relying on the news, but we definitely do see that happen. Something big hits the headlines like SolarWinds, and suddenly everyone's, hey, do we have SolarWinds? Do we have it? And obviously you need to be able to answer that and be on top of it. But ideally, this isn't a reactive thing that you're scrambling for, but you're leaning into a process that exists, that is part of your normal operations, and it doesn't require any big extra effort just because it happens to be in the news. a lot of times the things that hit the news aren't even the biggest things that you should be worrying about. There's tons and tons of exploited vulnerabilities out there that don't make the mainstream news. Now that does depend on where you're getting your news. If anybody has a good source of where they watch, I'd love to see that shared in the Q&A. But another kind of easy thing, pretty much everybody has a security scanner of some kind, and there usually is some third-party application vulnerability assessment in there, so that there's an ability to say, okay, you have this version of this application installed, there's a security patch available for that, and you should prioritize it. Unfortunately, it's not going to be everything, right? So if you have that full inventory and you're looking at everything that exists, you probably shouldn't simply be relying upon your security scanner to tell you which of the, potentially a few thousand applications in your environment may have a security vulnerability, because the security scanners are doing a lot more than just looking for what vulnerable software exists in general. I mean, of course, it depends on the security scanner in question, but coverage is really important. I know a lot of customers have 2 or 3 scanners or use like our SVM product on top of multiple other scanners, because nobody covers everything, and some do better in one area than another. And so, just kind of a red flag if you're only relying on your single scanner to potentially tell you about any third-party application vulnerability. It's probably not giving you that kind of coverage, or almost certainly isn't giving you that kind of coverage. And then NVD is the the most popular source for what's vulnerable, what's out there, what do I need to be looking at. That's the National Vulnerability Database, but it is a a public service, and it is full of some noise. It's full of some inaccuracies. Some things are rated much more critical than they should be, or much less critical than they should be, or just lack details. So it is kind of the standard for identifying a vulnerability with a CVE. That's the number assigned by the NVD, but it can be slow and isn't necessarily the end all be all. So anything free is good and should be leveraged, of course, but just for example, the SolarWinds recent update, I think it it was known by everybody on this call, no doubt, for about 2 weeks before a CVE was assigned to it. So there's a process for that to happen, and then the details to get added, and yeah, so it's well known, but it's not all you should be relying on, I guess, is my more simple point. And I'll throw it to you, Dylan, to give us your comments on this.
I'll just work in reverse, right, with the NVD, the National Vulnerability Database.
Cool.
It is exceedingly, am I on mute? Okay, good. It is exceedingly common that they just open up a placeholder, they being the vendor or the reporter of that vulnerability. So I've got CVE, 2020-17-64, and it's blank, and that's just super. And it got picked up, and I don't know what to do with it, right? It's blank. 2 days later, it's blank. A week later, it's blank. This isn't uncommon, right? And this is very anecdotal, but this is not uncommon. And again, it's a free source, which is nice, and you should absolutely leverage that in a way, in a process, in order to drive. But is it, is it something that I would build a process around entirely? Absolutely not. It's just too much lacking in order to deliver that content. And on top of that, it is a publicly funded item, right? It's ran by the U.S. government. The U.S. government, if it were to shut down, which we narrowly avoided about a week ago, it would shut down then. You would lose that feed. And if that's a feed that is a primary feed to your process, well, now your process has been hamstrung effectively. So you need to have other sources of data, other sources of truth to come in and help you fill the holes that are not being populated or addressed when placeholders exist, or when a vendor has not released their information in a timely and efficient fashion. Right? Other items need to be there to bolster that process. And I'm very process oriented when we talk about this, because this is something you're going to do all the time. And so you shouldn't be looking at it in a ad hoc, like knee-jerk response every time you go about it, because you're just going to be more and more inefficient every single time. Right? If you turn on the news and you're using that to drive your patching, you're never going to get anything accomplished. You know, you may not even have that piece of software and someone's blowing up on you. Well, again, that goes back to inventory, right? And your approved software list. I already knew it's on my approved software list, right? It didn't take long. So process again towards that, what needs to be patched versus information just coming screaming at you from the void that doesn't necessarily have context to what's going on in your environment. And that context is going to go back to, you know, what exists? What did you find? Where is it? What part of what business process is it part of? Is it in a high availability chain where I can do what I talked about before, because they actually, you know, the money was spent to prop that process up in a way that it would never go away, right? It's always there and redundant to be served to make money, or however, you know, what do all those things look like? What needs to be patched? I don't need the void screaming at me, telling me what's my priority. We have that built into the process, and it's delivering us our constant data stream of what's going on internally with the information appropriate to drive that decision making, because I can't patch everything, and I really can't listen to the screaming of the void when I'm looking at what is going to enable my business to be successful. Right?
And Dylan, I've had a question come in along this line, and you know, it's something that we discuss with our customers frequently. And the question is, will Flexera's SVM product be able to ingest scanner data so we can use existing vulnerability scanners as part of our process?
So I think that goes back to the way in which data is gathered, and we could, you know, kind of pin that to the first piece. So with for instance, the Flexera offering, the software vulnerability manager, its assessment is a file signature scan. So we are looking at the files that exist on the host. We scrape the header or footer of the file that contains the best detailed information. We're bringing that back, and that, you know, that's trusted, known information based on our method of gathering data, and we will respond to that accordingly. Now, most vulnerability scanners are scraping the registry, and they're going to come back with wildly different information. Not necessarily information that fits within the process that the software vulnerability manager is using in order to get to the next step. That information would need to be normalized first to our language in order for that to be moved forward, which is actually something that we're doing in our IT visibility kind of side, or a portion of what we're doing with Flexera in general, is to take information, and eventually I would imagine we'll be able to take information from security scanners and the like, and normalize that so that when it's fed into our hopper to give you your options of what you should be doing, right? It's not something that we'll be looking at today, but it's definitely on the roadmap for later on to use other data sources. But for right now, you know, admittedly, this is a bias. Ours is the best. We have the best data collection method for our particular use case right now, and other information would be noisy to that effort, although we are looking to expand. But the noise is still going to be a problem until we have proper normalization for that content, so that it's all the same language going in against our vulnerability research database to give you the best output and make the best decisions. So that's the best answer I have right now.
Thanks. I had another question come in along that line too. Are there good security sources covering European, in parentheses, smaller software vendors?
Admittedly, my stomping grounds is North America, so I tend to stay within a lot of those data sources. I think we could definitely put a pin in this and look and see if we could write a KB article that perhaps calls some sources that could help. I'm a little out of my element on that side. I'm sure that it exists, but I'm more in the nuance on our end, because that's where I spend my time. But definitely, that's a great question that I think we could find information for. I think, right, China has their own NVD. I think that those different sources are definitely out there, right? And it's just a matter of whether or not you're using them for your purpose. And I'm more oriented towards where my business lives, and my business is North America, so I'm biased to my sources to speak to my, you know, my customers.
But it is something which could be suggested as software for us to track regardless of the size of vendor, correct?
Oh, absolutely, right? If it's a publicly available content that we could add into the mix of our research, absolutely. We're always looking for more items. It doesn't matter how obscure. If it exists and we can cover it, we'll absolutely do so.
And it really doesn't matter if it's North America, Europe, or anywhere else.
No, I'm in my patch, right? I'm just trying to do what I do there, but we are a global effort, right? And so absolutely we would appreciate content coming from those people who may be underserved by our centric North American, or at least my personal view, right? I'll say I'm dragging the process down, and I apologize.
Well, we've got a fair number of European customers, and our focus of what applications we cover is largely driven by our customer base. So it's fluid and interactive with the customer, exactly what we're focused upon.
I see one more challenge with NVD. I think it's very manual and very time consuming. Imagine you jumping between two systems. You've got inventory one place and you've got your vulnerabilities. Now, you need some place where you want to look all of these coming together in a single place, right? This is your inventory and these are the vulnerabilities. But if you're somebody who's depending on NVIDIA, I think it's very manual. You jump between the systems and it's just going to be not very efficient. It's a lot of work and of course that will also lead to a lot of human errors. So maybe a system where you see both of these data coming together. This is your inventory and these are the vulnerabilities in your inventory. I think that'll be a great thing than the NVD one.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And NVD on its own isn't going to do a whole lot of good. It's such a noisy, constant feed of information. It's not specifically relevant to you.
Yeah.
Very good point. You know what you have. You've identified there's a security vulnerability out there. You cannot patch it all. So, you could have the biggest patch catalog that exists, and I think that's the one we have. But so you can have the most patches, but you still would not want to patch them all. That's why when we put the patch automation feature in place, we allowed you to specify thresholds. So only if the CVSS or criticality is so high, only if the threat score is so high, do I want to automate the publishing of this particular patch. Because you have to go through a process of prioritizing, because you have to go through a process of testing. Even if the patch is rock solid and works perfectly in one environment, it may not in yours, or it may not play well with an application you have installed, or with your deployment mechanism, or any number of things that you probably run into if you're responsible for application deployments. You have to test it, you have to pilot it, and then you roll it out. And that obviously takes time and resources, and the number of updates that are being released, even the number of updates that are being released that are security related and applicable to you, are probably significant enough that you're just not going to try to tackle them all. I know in some cases, if you have access to a small patch catalog, you just try to keep up to date with that. And that is certainly an approach, and it does improve your security, but it leaves a huge blind spot to all the things. If you're measuring yourself against your patch catalog, then that's obviously a very narrow view of the world and a very narrow view of your environment, going back to that inventory source and how you'd reconcile those two things. The four main areas that we typically talk about when it comes to prioritization, our product allows you to see and sort all of this, but we don't prescribe this is how it should be for you. This is the most important one to you. It really is a customer or organization specific decision that needs to be made. So there's the prevalence, and I think a lot of people focus too much on this, particularly when there's a lack of other sources. So I've got Adobe Reader and Google Chrome on 100% of my systems. So if there is a security update, I'm going to get that one out there. Like I said, that's an approach, but it leaves a huge blind spot. So criticality or a CVSS score, some measure of how much damage would this vulnerability do to me if exploited, is the next most common way people traditionally try to score things. A lot of environments and customers and prospects we talk to say anything CVSS 7 or higher, it goes up to 10. 7 or higher, 30-day SLA, we have to get it addressed. And I always kind of go, man, that's really a lot of work to do. But again, if you're not looking at all your applications, but just those that you have visibility to, then maybe 7 or higher isn't overwhelming. And you can look at those below 7. Threat intelligence is the more interesting, more recent metric. And this is an indicator of the likelihood of exploitation. So it can be a highly critical vulnerability, but none of the bad guys have done anything with it. And therefore, we don't expect that it's going to be leveraged soon to do damage to your environment. So, and then on the flip side, it could be a relatively low severity, but there is an active virus, Trojan exploit out there that is being used in the wild. People are taking advantage of this particular vulnerability. Then, regardless of its criticality, or certainly diminishing the importance of the criticality, is the fact that it is being exploited. So those are typically the ones that you want to provide the most attention to. And then asset sensitivity. Not every system in your environment is as important as the one next to it. Your servers probably need to be treated differently. You probably have a remote site, or maybe you have remote workers that are traveling to dangerous places that you want to consider differently when prioritizing. You want these guys out on the road with their laptops overseas to have no vulnerabilities that are being exploited on their systems because they're more at risk. So all these things together kind of give you a way to sort and prioritize and focus on the things that really matter. And I think that in particular is threat intelligence, especially, is really a game changer, because if you look at the vulnerabilities that are actually exploited, those that are being exploited are typically in the 4 to 8 range of criticality. So if your policy was 7 or higher, that's what we're focusing on, then all those 5s and 6s out there that are actually being exploited would have fallen out of your view and not been prioritized and expose you to that risk. So that one, I kind of put on top. Criticality is more of a what if. The threat score or the threat intelligence metric is more what's actually happening, not what might happen, but is actually happening or likely to happen. I've run my mouth long enough.
I was going to say,
did I step on everything you would say? Or
no, I can always elaborate a little further. I mean,
cool.
One thing I always like to point out, well, first of all, just isolate CVS Score real quick. So you were talking about people looking at CVS Score and deciding to address a certain value, right? An output value of 7 or higher. Well, when CVSS v 3.0 came out, everything was a 10. Everything was a 10. So if everything's a 10 and you're addressing 7 or higher and everything's a 10, what do you do, right? That it wasn't a great metric. And when they released 3.1 and it actually started putting out more practical values that weren't where everything, because if everything's a 10, nothing's a 10, and if nothing's a 10 and you can't trust your values, then what are you really doing, right? So when 3.1 came out and the values became much more practical, right, to understand and process around, but we still have to remember that that's a theoretical value. Some very intelligent researchers in a very pristine lab came up with X, whatever it is. They, tweaked this and that, and it led to this, right? Again, in a lab in ideal conditions, and they created these outputs. So these could occur if other people had similar, highly trained, very well educated researchers to do whatever, but it's a theoretical problem, right? It hasn't been, it doesn't have boots on the ground, whereas threat intelligence, that's a practical issue. There is evidence, and I'm a huge fan of evidence, right? If there's evidence pointing towards a thing occurring, that should now elevate its status in your process to be, whatever that may be, depending on how the evidence now relates to the product and how that product relates to what you do in your business, right? If it's, iTunes, well, I don't really care. Too bad. As a matter of fact, you're lucky I even allow you to have it in the environment, so I may not, versus a database or the domain controller patch or, something that's driving our business, whatever that may be. That's going to be the priority, and that's your asset sensitivity. And then you'll look at your practical challenges, and then you should look at your theoretical challenges, right? And a theoretical challenge now could have enough weight that you do need to act upon it, especially if you're laboring under a compliance metric. Now, like PCI DSS or NERC SIP, for instance, they don't care, right? Threat intelligence is not part of the model yet that I understand. I haven't read the new content. It's still fairly based on CVSS. And you have to provide evidence for everything that you address regardless, right? And you have to look at that. So you need to know where you swim, and then you have to start looking at the, what's going on. My laptop in the grand scheme of things isn't that big of a deal, right? It should be addressed, but I have a finite amount of network resources and a finite amount of human resources and then automated resources that I can leverage to move this process, right? So again, if I run the world's patches through my environment, I'm choking out the business practice. I no longer have bandwidth available to do my business again. So you have a finite amount of resources that need to be addressed. Prioritization is key in how you're going to do that. So that's just kind of my extra pieces when it comes to looking at that. And then again, I'm always lobby for high availability. When it comes to, if it's a business process that runs and generates money and that's how you live, then it should live more than once. Right? It should be something that can, burn to the ground, but don't worry about that. I flipped the switch, or it just occurred on its own, and now it's just right there again, right? And everything's been tested and it's square and you're good to go. That's the kind of stuff that needs to be addressed, in addition to, how you're going to deal with the challenges of vulnerable software that you're hosting or that you're using to run your business. So I'll pause there in case anyone else has anything or get any questions.
Do you see that attached to disaster recovery as a process? Because that should be a failover system, but typically they're kept in sync. Would you update one and exercise your disaster recovery as an opportunity to switch?
Absolutely, because then I can also state that I did so. And as someone who answers security questionnaires all the time, that's a line item in every single one of them. When was the last time you ran your disaster recovery? Well, I did it the other week when I patched this server, right? And you're making sure that works, because you shouldn't just have a plan for disaster recovery, but not actually affect the plan, because then when you actually need it, you won't know if you're going to be able to do it. But if you're doing it all the time, and disaster recovery is actually really just part of your normal process, you just call it disaster recovery, well then when it does occur, when a disaster occurs, it's actually just part of your normal day. It's not that big of a deal. Again, process can govern everything, right? And it can't just exist on paper as a process. You have to do it, right? You have to live that, because once I go through it, I'll see that I'm inefficient, and you should always see that. And then once you see that, you can then fix that process or address it to a new version, which can then better address that process, because that process may have flaws that need to be patched as well, right?
I think of backup and recovery as a key one, right? Like how many people have you talked to that spent all kinds of years and years with backup tapes and offsite storage, and then one day they need to restore it. They find out, it doesn't work the way they expected, or it doesn't work at all. It's really dangerous not to try these things.
People I've witnessed with disaster recovery, their process in storing things for the event when a disaster were to occur is very good. Mm-hmm. They're excellent at creating data and repetition, or however to have that content available if X were to occur, but they've never actually exercised the response to X, or it's done once a year. And if you look at the turnover in IT, and if you're only practicing an exceedingly, cumbersome and process like disaster recovery that's very important to your business, the average IT person is turning over within the practice of that, your yearly practice. So that means you have people who've only witnessed that process like once at a glance, and then they're gone. They're moving somewhere else. It's very common that way. So now you have holes, right? And you need to patch those holes again. Same way with human interaction, the same way with a machine dealing with pulling bits out and putting bits back, right?
Yeah, I love the idea of attaching your update process to exercising your disaster recovery.
Guys, I have a question that I've been saving, but I think it might be a good time to broach it. The requester is asking about the process of uninstalling versus patching and where Flexera's software vulnerability manager solution is with the ability to support uninstalls. Now, I know this is really dependent on what the vendor provides as part of a patch, but maybe we could talk about patching versus uninstalling unapproved software.
Who wants to jump on that?
I think removing a problem is usually pretty great, right? I mean, if it's not on my list of approved software, and I'm a big fan of the approved software list, then how can we go about? So, in the patching world, you may not build the capability into the patch for it to uninstall the product that it's attending to, right? Because that's extra code, that's extra time and effort. They have to write that, they have to test it and make sure it does what it does, and they don't want to do that either, right? Nobody really wants to do extraneous or quote unquote extraneous work or whatever they deem that, because everything comes down to a calculation of return on investment or dollars, right, that are being spent. So a majority, unfortunately, of the patches that we utilize through, for instance, our software vulnerability manager, the vendor in their infinite wisdom was not kind enough to give us the capability to use that or to leverage that into an uninstaller. So where applicable, we take advantage of that, and it is available as an item. You can create an uninstall package through those items that are supported, and it's actually a column right next to the content item. It tells you whether or not it has that as a capability. And if it does not have that as a capability through the item, then you're looking at through a script. Right, then I'm probably going to use a script, and I'm going to call the original installed executable, which probably has capability to perform an uninstall of itself, right? Or I'm going to talk to the control panel and the products and features, right, and add or remove, and look at it that way. But you can script that out. Now, is that something that we are looking into? I'm uncertain when it comes to that. And I think this is all around the Flash update. Thank God we're getting rid of that. First Java basically kind of went away, not really, but for the most part, right, it's in a dark hole now, and it costs so much that it's kind of, most people don't want to deal with it, but thankfully it's not really in the public eye, and it's given us enough problems. And Flash, it's given us enough problems. I think it's about time for it to go away. How can we get it out of our system? Well, we also have an ability to help deliver any custom item, right? So Adobe should have created an uninstaller, right? It's not up to us to do Adobe's work for them. We'll help facilitate Adobe's work into your environment in a fashion that is much more efficient than that putting a USB stick into each computer and roller skating around your environment, which we can't even do today, right? We're all remote workers. So through our custom delivery piece or our custom package, you could easily take their uninstall and use that to spread across your environment. I see most people are writing PowerShell scripts, and they're just calling up and doing a removing the registry key, and then calling an uninstall, and then cleaning up the package after the fact. So I would start with Adobe, right? They created the problem in the first place. They should have an uninstaller. We can accommodate that into a package and help automate that and get that out into your system. But I'm uncertain at this particular juncture how we will address it, because I do believe that Flash is one of the packages that did not have a built-in uninstall feature to the patch, which limits our ability to take advantage if it doesn't exist. Because we're not the creator of that, Adobe is. If we were to rewrite that package, it would now be Flexera Flash, and we don't want anything to do with that. We have our own awesome products and solutions, but we don't want.
We are actually digging into that specific application.
Yeah.
You got any details on that, Karen?
Yeah, I think Adobe already released the uninstaller patch, like Dylan was saying, it's already there. And at this point of time, we are in the testing phase where we could see if we can leverage our existing package, make some edits, and then use the Adobe's uninstall a package, so it goes and uninstalls Flash. So it's in the testing process now. The initial results are looking really great. So once we get all this thing done, there should be one KB article out to explain how to create this uninstall package for Flash in SVM. It should be out there once we have it.
And I mentioned we had, the largest patch catalog, and that is, we call that the vendor patch module because it's the vendor setups, right? We're not doing a bunch of special wrapping and edge case handling and customization handling. It really is just what the vendor gives you, and sometimes what the vendor gives you isn't great. But one thing that we are looking to introduce this year are uninstall capabilities for the vendor patch module patches. Right now, they're just silent installs, but we'll be introducing, along with some customization for some of the MSI patches in particular, the ability to create an uninstall patch as well. But good question and good timing because we are in the Q&A portion of our program.
And yeah, Bob, along that line, there's a long question here. I don't want to read the whole thing, but the requester makes note of the fact that when an application moves to end of life, we just change it to insecure in SVM, and that's it. So they're kind of left with just an insecure application. I know there's reasons why we do that, but maybe you and Dylan could expound upon that.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and we do want to provide, a date or some historical reference to help prioritize end-of-life software. But end-of-life software is not receiving security updates. It's not being examined for even the need of security updates in many cases. So you have to treat end-of-life versions as vulnerable versions. Because you have to assume the worst. And that's the main reason that we just provide that status. We do have, in Technopedia, in IT visibility, some of the things coming up later this year, the ability to provide a little better data when it comes to end of life. From a security standpoint, we just tell you, is it end of life, yes or no? And if it is, address it. But we don't currently provide the insight as to what is the date it will be end of life, so that you can kind of get ahead of it. So that's something coming that I think will be very interesting. So you can see, what applications in my environment are going to be end of life in 30, 60, 90 days, so that I can get in front of it. Anything to add to that, Dylan?
I'm with you when it comes to the auto status. So when an item becomes end of life, to me, it is automatically now highly critical and exposed from remote as a given. Because if the vendor is no longer supporting it, the chances that the bad actor is now looking to address that is exceedingly high, because they know, and they've all spent time most likely in organizations before they got to where they were, or at least they understand as a premise that software will likely linger for at least a year in the environment before it's cleaned out. Most vulnerabilities are addressed around 180 days after the release of the vulnerability. Well, EOL to me it's now vulnerable. So if it's product discontinued, like Shockwave went 2 years ago or whatever, and then Flash now product discontinued means that version is now basically critically insecure, right? And it should be addressed as such. At least that's just me, right? That's my label for it. And then I labor under that because I know that within the next few months or half a year, that will likely have a threat now exposed against it. Adobe doesn't care. They're not going to release a new patch for it, or if they did, it'll cost you $1 million, like Windows XP and Windows 2007, or not, Windows 7 rather. Those had some out-of-band patches that forced people to go and do an extra deal, or I don't know what to call it, like licensing or what have you, with Microsoft, and spend like $1 million a year to get patches for end-of-life software. Right?
Yeah, extended support.
Your business system, but you should understand and have that data coming in so that you're managing yourself to move into the new capabilities that the that these new items are offering you that the EOL didn't have, in addition to the security that is offered in the new version, which EOL will never have. Right.
Yeah. From a bad actor standpoint, like that's a more interesting target, right? If this is a popular software that's now end of life, then it's a perfect target for the bad guys to take advantage of, because now you've got an application that isn't being updated, that's probably still being used, and that makes it a more interesting target inherently. And I also see, when you focus on prevalence and those really well-known applications like Google or Java or the applications that we all stay on top of all the time, because we're all staying on top of them all the time, they're less interesting targets for the bad guys. And the ones that really are interesting are those mission critical applications that aren't that well known and that aren't being picked up by your average security scanner. So it really does come back to you understanding what do you have and what is vulnerable, and with those being able to focus on not just those well-known applications, because it's more interesting to attack something that everybody has because it's out there more, but it's also mostly going to be in that managed bucket of applications. And wouldn't it be better as a bad guy to have an exploit for a vulnerability that is not being looked at? We just, when I was talking about threat intelligence, their average is CVS 4 to 8. They're not just going after the big ones. They're trying to look under that line, like where can we invest our time to build something that's going to do the most damage or be most applicable, and that's not going to be the things that everybody's looking at. Do we have any other questions, Shelley?
No, Bob, I think that we have, oh, wait, we did have one come in. Sorry, it snuck in and I wasn't looking. We have a customer who's talking about Flexera SVM Cloud. They've been using it for a while now, and it sounds like they're a big fan, which is always great. But their biggest annoyance is the integration with SCCM. It says that SVM manages the update patches and it manages it well, but when will it develop into managing the existing applications within SCCM? At present, they update their applications using Secunia or Flexera SVM, but we're unable to update the original deployment of the application into the SCCM portal. So I really think this ties into when do you patch versus when do you package, and how do you make sure that your deployment package is updated in alignment with the patch that you're pushing out. And this is a very common conversation that we're having lately with our customers.
Yeah, it's definitely important to get that original application updated, right? You can patch it, and then the next time your deployment system issues that application to a device, it's going to be the insecure version unless you've updated it, and then hopefully you patch it right away. But you obviously don't want to intentionally be deploying vulnerable applications in your environment. So it is a matter of process. The way that SVM goes about publishing updates is really the same way Microsoft goes about deploying its updates using WSUS. So it's got the applicability rules baked into it, and it's assigned broadly, and where applicable, it installs. But that same application, that same process, facilitated by SVM, doesn't also go and find where is your original package and get that updated as well. You can download the package in SVM and you can put it where it's supposed to go, but we don't currently have a dynamic mechanism to try to see that through. Kieran and I have been talking about the idea of publishing to SCCM using the application model versus just the WSUS push, and that would potentially address this specifically. So we have in our community an ideas portal that was recently launched, and there you can submit ideas and vote on the ideas of others. This would be a great one. I'd like to see this get enough interest that we can prioritize it, because I do think it would be of value. Our recent effort to enhance the deployment capabilities has been more around supporting other systems. So we're supporting Intune now. Obviously seeing a lot of interest on Intune, particularly accelerated as a lot of people are working from home, and now these devices are outside the DMZ where a CCM isn't necessarily managing them. We're also looking at other solutions like Workspace ONE is another that we're looking to support in the near future. But enhancing what we currently have and handling Microsoft updates with more options is definitely something within our scope of interest. And so, having our customers call that out as interesting and vote it up would help us to give it the priority it needs to get done soon.
And Bob, I would add to that we also have our Admin Studio product line that is very well known and very well used in the industry. Mm-hmm. And a lot of our customers are utilizing SVM in conjunction with Admin Studio because they have both packaging and patching teams and efforts. And it's a coordinated process between the two teams. And with the addition of our vendor patch module, which also feeds content into Admin Studio as far as the patch catalog goes, right? That's the package feed module in Admin Studio. That really is a link between the two that can help bridge a process to make sure that the latest patch is updated and that the most updated package is being utilized to be pushed out for new installs with Admin Studio. So if anybody wants to have further conversations with us about how we can help on that dual effort to make sure that you're in sync and in line, we're very happy to work with you on that. And we are working with other customers on that today.
Yeah, great point. All right.
So it looks like we're done as far as questions go. Wait, I'm lying, Bob. I'm lying.
There's
as I'm
always
talking.
one more. You can't say that.
there's actually a couple of more. Let me see. Let's see. I'm not quite sure the context of this. The question is, we have the same problem versus applications gold image via task sequence versus Flexera third-party catalog. So not really a question, more of a comment.
I think it's a follow-up to the System Center one from Gareth.
Yeah.
It's not just the patch and the application distribution point, but potentially also your gold image that you need to keep up to date. Absolutely. If you're image based, or
if you have like self-service portal, then people are ordering software that's vulnerable, and then you have to do it twice, right? Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, these things can certainly all be tied together through process and facilitated by tools like ours, of course.
Yep.
We're down to just a few more minutes, but it sounded like maybe there was one more we could squeeze in.
Well, there was a comment or a question regarding our ability to integrate with Intune, which I know that you addressed. And Dylan did provide the update to the actual requester. But yes, we have released our support for SVM to hand patches off to Intune, so that is available today.
Yeah, and we posted some details around that to the community, and we'll continue to, right? So Karen and I, on a pretty regular basis, and I think I've seen some good stuff from Dylan as well. We're all trying to feed this resource. So there's a link here. If you go, this is kind of a friendly version of the link. You'll see it's actually pretty ugly once you get there from a URL perspective. But the community itself was launched just over a year ago, kind of revamped, and has been getting more and more functionality. So we've got the ideas section that I really encourage you to participate in. The blogs are where we're typically posting information and details about new releases. And then, of course, there's a discussion forum, which is typically used for more of a support mechanism. But I do encourage you to just bring up topics there. Or if we didn't get to your question or you think of it later, go to the forum and post it there. We're all watching, and we'll be happy to follow up there.
And Bob, it looks like Dylan's replying to one last question. I don't know if you want to comment in person, Dylan, or just finish your follow-up, but the question was around, do you have a comprehensive patch reporting system that we could use with our auditors in mind?
I certainly talk faster than I type. I get big thumbs and they're stupid. But I would say that our assessment could absolutely be a report that you could use with auditors in mind, because it will show the patch level of every product that has been assessed in your environment. So if our assessment client is allowed to touch every host, we'll come back with every bit of installed software that we know, and we'll give it to the patch level, right? And then include any vulnerability content that may be attributed to that version at that level will be part of the output. You can absolutely use that. We have like NERC customers that use our data in their reporting all the time. Same thing with PCI DSS compliance customers that have to report to auditors. So I personally view that content is 100% in line with creating a report to give to auditors. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way, but
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it, and you nailed it just in time. We're up.
yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you everyone for joining. Watch out for future similar materials. We've got one coming up more Admin Studio focused about packaging in just a couple of weeks. But again, go to the community, watch there, participate there, and thanks again.
Thanks all. Have a
Thanks,
good day.
everybody.
Thank
Have
you.
a good week. Cheers.